they call me Crazy Jack. And I think crazy is good. We are crazy, but we're not stupid.
You keep pushing because you believe in yourself and in your vision.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
The Creativity Podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Creativity Podcast, the podcast for entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs who want to make a difference in the world. Today, we have David Beckham, founder of Chudo Consulting and keynote speaker on change management. David, welcome and thanks for being here on the Creativity Podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So I'm super glad you're here today. Just for those listening, so of course you want to make a joke, David Beckham. No, it's not a joke. Believe me, I've asked if David was making fun of me when he says his name first, but it's not. And he is special in his own way. He's not in a footballistic way. And it's when I've met David, it was on a business analyst convention at which I talked as well, and he talked as well there, and we had a great chat actually before we going on stage about change, about creativity, about samurais, about so much more. And at some point I thought, wow, he should be on the podcast and have this chat again. And as you'll see, David has quite a life path with obstacles. David, you were also diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
That's right.
And your mindset and sense of reinvention is truly an inspiration. So I want to talk about that later if you're okay with that.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
But first, tell us already what you're doing today in a couple of words.
Yeah, I do keynote speaking. I speak at conferences on a semi-regular basis. I do webcasts. This is my first podcast, which is a first for me. So that's good. I've done a number of webinars. I have two blogs on the go at the moment, and just generally commentate on training, change management, personal transformation, and managing change in your life and your business, really. So apart from that, I'm quite boring.
Such a hot topic today.
Yes.
It's not boring. You trying your modesty with me doesn't work. Okay, I know
Fair
you're
enough.
super interesting. But at the beginning, before all that, you were a business analyst, right?
Yes,
So
that's right.
what's the job of a BA?
The job of a BA is to generally be a nuisance to people who want to spend money on IT projects. And what I mean by that is that business analysts sit between the people who are spending the money and are going to use the software or the change process that you come up with, and the IT designers, and they try and get them to work together. So it's a bit like being between a rock and a hard place sometimes. It can be a very interesting position because everybody has their own point of view as to how it should work. And the business analyst is trying to get the best result for everybody, really, but particularly the best outcome for the customer. And you do find yourself being a diplomat. You end up doing a lot of negotiation, but also you have to be very comfortable with ambiguity. A lot of the time when you go into a project, nobody really knows what they're doing, and it's your job to kind of surf that wave of ambiguity, really, which can be quite entertaining.
So what is a typical day of a BA? Like you deal with a lot of numbers. Is that not limited to this?
You're more kind of asking a lot of questions, particularly if you're in the stage where you're finding out what the project is going to do. You're normally presented with a budget, and you're normally presented with a project manager who knows that they've got a plan and a deadline and a budget to meet. And you're the one who says, well, why are we doing this? And is there a better way of doing it? Or should we even do it at all? Which is sometimes quite a controversial question. So it tends to be about asking questions. It could be working with a set of IT designers to look at the way a system's going to work. It could be working with a set of people in, say, a call center to see how they manage their calls. Normally involves questions to kind of add efficiencies and make things better for the end customer, really.
Wow, cool. And so you decided to switch at some point? First of all, did you like this job, this position?
I loved it. I loved it.
Okay.
It suited me it suited me to the ground. But interestingly enough, I never planned on being one, because when I first started working about 300 years ago, because as you know, I'm quite old, but when I started working at the company I worked for in 1986,
Wow.
I did 7 years in administration, in the administration department, and then they chucked me out because I kept asking too many questions, like, why do we do it this way? And there must be better ways of doing this. So they threw me out into IT, where I eventually gravitated to become a business analyst, because when I first started, we didn't actually know what the role was. And I loved it, and I sort of thrived in it. But then I suppose after I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, which was nearly 11 years ago when I was 43, I began to realise that being in projects and looking at IT change and stuff, I suppose wasn't really fulfilling me as much as it used to. I enjoyed it. I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed working with the people and figuring out the problem. But it made me realise that I could perhaps do more through my own personal experience and sharing that. So that
It's
was
not black or white. It's just
no, it's not.
you liked it, but did you felt there was some more?
Yeah, I think I sort of got to the point where I'd sort of read the book, watched the film, and bought the T-shirt, really, and there wasn't much that was kind of fulfilling me in the project area. So I was lucky enough that I was able to move into more of a training and mentoring role, and from that point I decided, well, actually, this is kind of what I want to do full time. So when the opportunity arose, I set up my own little company.
So wait. That's I have questions before
Yes,
that.
that's fine. Fine. We can
No, no, no.
travel back and forth through time as we desire.
Exactly. Exactly. You told me that being diagnosed with the Parkinson disease helped you uncover what you really wanted to do.
Yes.
And so you gave us a glimpse right now. What did you? How did that happen? And what did you realize exactly?
I think I realised, because Parkinson's is a degenerative condition, it gets worse over time. It gradually robs you of your capability to do things, physical things and stuff like that. I mean, at the moment, I'm a bit shaky. You might be able to hear it in my voice, but I can go through a day where I maybe have 2 or 3 hours where I can't do anything because I will have the tremors and the muscle spasms, which is quite
Wow.
annoying. So it sort of taught me that there is finite time to our existence, without getting too philosophical. Well, I probably will get philosophical at
It's the
some
place
point.
to be philosophical.
You know,
Unleash the philosopher inside of you.
exactly, and
Philosopher.
we don't get any. There's no refunds at the end of the journey.
Hmm.
You don't get another go. Well, I suppose it depends on your spiritual inclination as to whether you think you get another go or not. But
Yes.
in this particular arrangement of atoms and electricity, I will not reappear once I've gone. So it's important, I think, to do what you can to fulfill your own genius, I suppose, or creativity or
Hmm.
purpose. And that was the main thing that really drove me, is that life goes by very quickly, and it can change in an instant. It can. I mean, my life changed in the space of one sort of sentence when my neurology consultant said, "Well, I'm 99.9% sure you've got Parkinson's," and that was like a very intense moment, and you're never prepared for it. But I think you've got to try and make the most out of it as much as you can, and that was. I suppose that was the thing that set the ideas off in my head about doing more of what I enjoy doing, which is helping people through their change and getting them through challenges that they're facing. So yeah, that's probably where it came from.
Wow, that's beautiful, and I think it's hard as well when so it's a bit paradoxical. Paradoxal? What do we say?
That's
Paradoxical.
paradoxical. Yeah, I think
Only
that's right.
paradoxal.
You were right
Um,
first time.
that sometimes we almost need such an event to realize that although we know it, we know it. I tell myself I don't have such obstacles in my life. I have other obstacles, but not that big, and I wasn't certainly diagnosed with such a condition. But I know that. I remind myself of that, and yet I don't have the mindset. So it's really it's a shame that we need to be there to realize this.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my concepts that I came up with after my diagnosis was the term comfortable trauma, because
Mm,
all change is traumatic, and you get the negative or the uncomfortable traumatic changes like the one I went through, a diagnosis that could be extended to losing someone or losing your job, or significant life change is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable and traumatic. The irony is, and the paradox is, that's the one that tends to stick, because it's like slapping you in the face. The ones that we
yeah.
want to do tend not to stick as well because they're comfortable trauma. So I sort of introduced this concept of giving people the opportunity to listen to me and my uncomfortable trauma that I went through, and hopefully that would comfortably traumatize them, for want of a better word, into thinking about what they wanted to do, because it's not easy. I mean, in some of my sessions I say to people, what would you do if you knew you were going to die? And people will say, oh, I'd go to Euro Disney, or
Mm.
I'd sail around the world, I'd go buy a plane. I said, well, why aren't you doing it? Because you're going to die. And people get really quite upset about it. And they, well, there's no need to talk like that. And I said, but you are going to die.
We don't want to look at it, right?
No, exactly. Nobody gets out of here alive, unfortunately. No one's found a way of doing it yet. So, it's like the book. Here we go. We're getting into samurai for a second here.
I was
The book,
about to launch you on
the
that.
book, the Hagakure book.
Yes.
The opening sentence is, the way of the samurai is in death. And if you think about it, we're very very frightened of approaching that subject,
So
but it
wait,
is
for
going to happen.
listeners, wait, I need to unfold a couple of things. First, you go too fast.
Oh, sorry, mate.
No, 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 no. So, first of all, you were talking about comfortable trauma, and I know that you have a project that you launched with a colleague.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, my colleague Dave Harper, who I used to work with at Aviva, he worked in a different location, but he went through a difficult health diagnosis. He was diagnosed with cancer, but he's now luckily in remission.
Okay.
And we found that Dave left the company a few years before I did, and we found that we were getting more and more in touch with what we were talking about. In fact, we both developed very similar presentations separately, and then one day we presented them one after the other, and it had the whole room in tears. I think it was almost like a competitive illness competition.
Wow.
And we decided to sort of pool our knowledge, and we've kept in touch, and we chat every week. And we recently decided to just do these little broadcasts, coffee break coaching, we call it. It's only a sort of 10-minute little chat that we record on Zoom, talking about our experiences, not necessarily with change, but things like communication skills, leadership, that kind of stuff.
Really cool.
And it's
We'll
just,
share a link. We'll share a
yeah,
link
yeah.
to
It's,
your
it's
thing.
just
Yeah.
it's just two of us having fun more than anything.
That's really cool. And so to come back to, because I stopped you in your in your flow. So
Sorry.
what is your, I was about to say obsession, but we have both this obsession about samurais, this interest in samurais and in the old Japanese philosophies.
Yeah, I think the thing I admire about the Japanese way of life is they tend to have everything treated as an art. There's an art of everything in their culture. And I got interested in martial arts as a young person, and I never really, where I lived, there weren't really that many martial arts classes. So in the end, I ended up taking up the English martial art, which was fencing. Well, I
Mm,
say English, the French, of
yeah.
course, were the real experts in it for many, many years. We struggled on behind, and I enjoyed fencing. I really wanted to get into something like kendo, but again, there
Yeah.
wasn't anything like that
It's
near
hard
where
to
I lived.
find.
It
Yeah.
is very difficult. And getting anyone to teach you the art of drawing the sword in Norfolk, where I live in the UK, you might as well try and fly to the moon by yourself, because it's just not going to happen. So I used to read a lot about martial arts and the samurai, and I started to bring it into my lessons as a fencing coach, and I found it really worked. And once I realised it'd work in that context, I thought, well, will it work in my job? And some of the lessons did. So yeah, I've always been obsessed. Well, yeah, obsessed is a good word, because I constantly refer back to it. So yeah, I just think there's a lot to be learnt from the level of study that the samurai put into their craft. And I know that romanticizes them a bit, because in later periods they were sort of civil servants with swords, but
Yeah, exactly.
you know, in the classical period, as it were, they were definitely a breed apart.
Yeah, you were talking about this book that I told you I've read like 4 times when I was a teenager. That is completely weird to do. But so this book is called Hagakure.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that for people who don't know the concept?
Well, it's a classic kind of book on the samurai. It was written by one of the retainers of one of the clans, and it's basically a sort of instruction manual on how to be a samurai. And some of the things you expect it to be kind of, you know, this sort of cut and this is how you use your sword, but it's actually more of a handbook on life and behavior, talking, behavior in court, and that sort of stuff. But the first thing, the point is made in the book, is that, you know, the way of the samurai is in death. And the concept was, you know, if you can conquer that fear, you can then act spontaneously in everything you do for better reasons and for better results.
And death is everywhere in the book. They talk
Oh
about
yeah,
that all the
there's a lot
time
of
and
it,
very
isn't there?
directly. Yeah.
Yes, there's no kind of getting away from the fact, if you were a samurai, you were going to end up dead sooner or later. That's for sure. Probably sooner rather than later. But because the Japanese samurai always had the motif of the cherry blossom, which is very resonant for me, because I have a couple of cherry blossoms or cherry trees in my garden, and the blossom is just finishing now.
What is the metaphor with that?
Well, the metaphor is the cherry blossom is beautiful, but is transient. And the samurai philosophy was to live a beautiful life, knowing that it's going to end.
Oh, I
If
didn't know that.
you've seen the film Last Samurai with Tom Cruise,
long time ago.
which is a good film. It's a bit cheeky in the sense that Tom Cruise teaches the samurai how to be samurai, which is probably
Of course he's American.
Well,
no.
exactly. This is the way the world works, isn't it? But there is a lot of reference to cherry blossoms. The main Japanese character there is constantly looking for the perfect cherry blossom as one of his ambitions in life. So yeah, there's this concept of the cherry blossom being beautiful but brief, and that's the ideal that they were after, I think.
And what other parts of Japanese philosophy do you like? You said everything is treated as an art. We're talking about death and samurai. Is there other things Zen related, or is it
Oh yes,
maybe more? Yeah, I
Zen.
knew there was something about that.
I'm very much into Zen.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at it a lot of the time, but I think it's a
Mhm.
fascinating philosophy. It's kind of boiled down Buddhism at the end of the day. You know, it's as basic as it can get. And I love calligraphy, Japanese calligraphy. I think their art and their ink paintings are fantastic. I think that's a kind of expression of the moment in itself, some of the work that they do. So yeah,
It
so I
is.
have a wider and the buildings, the temple buildings, etc., etc. Everything has a reason to it. So
You've been to Japan, right?
nope, never been.
Oh, you've never been to Japan.
I'd love to go,
You
but I
will
fear I'd be
love it.
disappointed in a
Oh
sense.
no, 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 no.
No,
I trust me, you won't. Everyone who went to Japan who is into some kind of philosophical or manga or whatever you want that
yeah,
is related to Japan. I used to do a lot of judo, as you know.
yes,
Since I'm 6 years old, I do martial arts. I love manga. I love the culture. I love the food. And you go there, and it's better. It's better than you expected. You're like,
is it?
ooh,
Mm,
exactly. Oh, wow! You so surprised. Of course, every country has its ups and downs, and also his defaults. But when you go there as an observer, it's you go to another world. It's crazy. You will love it when you
yeah,
have the chance after this horrible period to go there. tell me about it. I want you to I want
Excellent.
you to call me, and I want to hear in your voice that you would love it. The
I
buildings,
also
the yeah.
very fond of sake as well, so I'm quite.
Yeah, you would love it. You will love
Yeah,
everything. Trust me about it.
I'll take
But
your word on it.
no, it's interesting. And so Chudo Consulting, what does Chudo means?
Middle way, middle way.
Ah,
So
so
it's
why?
well because in the world of business analysis, you're never taking any sides apart from the right outcome. So you're always in my book, and this is where my worldview probably gets a bit deeper than some other people, because I'm sure there are a lot of business analysts who just think, well, I work on IT projects to deliver IT systems. But for me, it's more of the way you do it. And I think you're always walking that middle way. You're never taking sides. You're just pushing people towards the right outcome. You're not agreeing with one side or the other.
Hmm.
So as a BA, you kind of walk the middle path. So yeah, that was quite a nice sort of way of communicating it for me.
Oh, it's great. I love how everything is, how you made sense of everything. Um, your
Well, I'm
job,
working on it.
your purpose. No, no, no. It's we can feel it that there was a, when we can see the point of the iceberg. It means there was a lot of introspection
Yes,
behind, and I
yeah,
love to see the little tip of the iceberg and say, oh, it makes sense, makes
mm,
sense. I know that behind there's a lot
yes.
of thoughts. So no, it's great.
I
It's
don't
great.
tend
And
to share much of this with most people because I never get the chance, But it's like everything there is in my presentations. I'll pick a particular picture because there's a meaning to it for me, Particularly in my keynote speech, "The Power of Change." Every image I use in that presentation has got a resonance for me.
I want to talk about your talk and what's in
Yeah,
it, because I'm super interested in change, as you know, and you're the guy to talk to about change. I want to get back to you a little bit. How
yeah,
did
sure.
you change your life after this introspection and this realization? How did you switch to entrepreneur? It was in a heartbeat, I guess. So what was the thoughts behind?
Yeah, I think I realised I had something that I needed to say, and that in itself was kind of a creative epiphany. Really, I was listening to because I'm a big movie soundtrack nerd. I'm a huge
Oh,
fan of movie soundtracks as well. So
okay.
I'm a great fan of Hans Zimmer, and there's some new chaps coming out. Gustafsson, who did The Mandalorian and stuff like that. There's a lot of new composers coming out. They've gone very Nordic recently. There's a much more kind of different flavour to sound on films. But I was listening to a particular piece of music from a film called Lone Survivor, which is a film set in Afghanistan with I can't remember the chap's name now. He was in the latest Transformer films, American actor,
Okay.
been in loads of films, and he's completely gone from my head. Anyway, he plays the lone survivor in this film, but there was an amazing soundtrack to it. So I did what I normally do: is not go out and buy the DVD. I go out and buy the soundtrack album and
Wow.
listen to this music, and all of a sudden. The images and words came into my head for the little animations I use in my keynote speech, and it was sort of that moment of, well, yeah, it was a revelation in a sense, not necessarily religious, but it was sort of a creative
Hmm.
revelation and an epiphany that I thought, well, this is something I really care about. This has come from inside me, so maybe I should do something about it. And once I had that framework, then the presentation sort of followed really. So it came out of nothing really, like a lot of creative urges, I
Wow.
suppose.
That's really cool. And on a more down to earth note, how did you? So you just open your company? How did that happen? Because I know that when you work in a company for a long time, it's not easy to
No,
take the leap to dare to say, okay, I'm going to change my life now.
yeah.
So how did you proceed in?
Well, I suppose I had the luxury of kind of sort of testing it without going live, if you see what I mean. I was doing the keynote speeches, they seemed to be quite successful, and I had a lot of good feedback, and I was working with a lot of different people who were saying, "Oh, what you've got here is really unique." And then my friend Dave Harper, who I mentioned earlier, bought me a book when I think when I was talking about leaving or thinking about leaving. He knew I was thinking about leaving, called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by
Okay.
Susan Jeffers. And I read it and I thought, well, yeah, it is scary. It is frightening, but it's if it's worth it, it's worth it. So in the end, I just thought, well, I've got to jump. I've got to do
Yeah.
it, and the circumstances were right. I did it. I actually was at the BA conference in 2018, I think it was, or 2019, when I announced to the world that I was leaving my previous employment. And within an hour at the social event in the evening, I'd had 3 contract offers to do
Wow.
to do stuff that I really wanted to do. So I think what one tip I would say is never test the waters with both feet. Always put one foot in the water first, and build up a network, build up contacts with people, and just build up experience. And it will come.
I like that because it's yeah, I think people get caught in this fear, sometimes even unconscious fear, and just analysis paralysis,
Oh,
and they be
completely.
like, well, without any subtle pun, but it's the analysis can really block you.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old cliche in the BA in the IT world. If you want a room full of BAs to make a decision, it's never going to happen because we're so used to analysing stuff and presenting options that with
Ah,
making a decision, it was difficult. But in the end, I thought, yeah, I've got something that's worth saying. I mean, I call things what do I call? There's serendipity in life sometimes.
yeah,
There's moments where you look back and you think that was really significant. And that chat we had was a hugely significant event for me because the fact that we sat there for 3.5 hours almost and talked about all these different things convinced or helped convince me that I could do it, and I was interesting enough to give it a go. So all these little moments that you trace back after the event
yeah.
are very, very significant. I,
It's hard to see ourselves, especially in this type of work where you are part of the product because
yes,
it's so close to you, right? People buy your talk, people buy also the experience, people buy your experience and your
well, they
what
buy
you
your
lived.
passion as well, don't they?
Yeah,
Your
your energy, and
enthusiasm. Yeah,
it's very hard to judge yourself and be like, oh, am I good enough? So it's
yeah,
I totally relate to what you say. It's all the people you meet and the feedback you have, but it's at the end it's also similar to a lot of business ventures and creative projects
yes,
that you pick up the clues, you listen to some feedback, and you just test it basically,
yeah.
if we can also see it like that. And plus you add a good dose of introspection, and
Yes,
and
I
here you
think
go.
I think that's really important, the introspection and retro. I've noticed in life that it's what you thought were really quite minor, insignificant events can be the most significant ones. I call them retroportant moments because you look back on them and retrospectively, and they're really important. But at the time, you think, "Oh, I just had a nice chat there," or I just said hello to that person." But it's hardly ever the big moments that you think will be significant that turn out to be that way. It's always the little things. It's the kind of sort of pebbles on the beach that you pick up as you go along through life that kind of come back to you when you need them, I think.
So what were your main obstacles when you started as an entrepreneur and launching your business?
Well, I suppose my main obstacles were overcoming my own imposter syndrome, which I still get every so often. Just overcoming that kind of um, "am I good enough" feeling. I think also
Mm.
convincing myself that I had something that was uniquely mine that I could pour things into. Because you'll appreciate this, I'm sure, that it's difficult to really, really, really deliver other people's material. You can believe in it, but if you've written it yourself, you're going to get it 100% because you've written it. You get exactly what the nuances are. So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there's that thing. Well, am I just doing my thing and flattering myself? So you have to overcome the kind of imposter syndrome. And there was a lot of practical things to learn, bank accounts, tax, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, legislation, legal stuff. But that's just stuff you learn at the end of the day. You can read that in a book, but and I think building the contact networks. Once I'd actually got my first sort of paycheck in my bank account, it was like, oh, I've arrived, that actually I can do this. I mean, it's fair to say I probably do more unpaid stuff than I do paid, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter to me. So, I
Hmm.
do it because I want to do it.
So how do you overcome those psychological obstacle, imposter syndrome, and how do you because you are going to tell me it's a lot of introspection again. So how do you proceed when you have those introspection moments? Is that, do you take some time, or is it just something that is at the back of your mind? Do you work on it? How do you work on it?
I think for me, when I'm feeling, a little bit hesitant or perhaps a little bit nervous, like if I'm premiering a new presentation or stuff like that, I personally do a lot of visualization. That works as a technique for me. I visualize previous successful presentations
Mm,
and get myself into that mindset of, what it felt like. I won't just sort of think of the words I used or whatever. I'd think about the feelings I had. I'd think about how the room was, what the noise was like, what the lighting was like. I put the whole event into my mind, and it kind of. I'm a great believer in the connection between body and mind, which we can probably come back to because that's the answer to a different question, I think. But
yeah.
I think that helps me, and also I tend, when I've got doubts, I tend to review feedback that I've had. I had some. I did a big corporate um, conference well, 3 or 4 summers ago, and it went well. It was at the Football Association headquarters in the UK, and it went pretty well. I was there the night before, and I sort of was on the following day, and I sort of had a hotel room, and I was sat in the hotel room, and I looked in the mirror as I sat there, because I tend to re-rehearse my presentation a couple of times before I go on stage.
Yeah.
And I looked up in this sort of, the desk sort of they have in hotel rooms, and I looked in the mirror and I thought, this is really me. This is really
Mm,
me doing this. This is not somebody else. And these people appreciate what I'm doing, and they're prepared to invest in it. And that
yeah.
was a big, big breakthrough for me. But the other big breakthrough from that event was a few months later. I had an email from a young lady who'd seen the presentation, and she said, I found it really good, really useful, and it was really helpful for me when my parents were killed in a car crash, because I was able to think back to what you said, and it really helped me through the event. And she said I was then able to tell some of my other relatives, and it helped them as well. And I thought, well, stop the bus. My in a way, my job here is done. I'm never going to get better feedback than that. So I often relate back to that and think how that made such a difference for me. And I went back to her and said, well, you've just changed my life by giving me that feedback. Because I think you establish these virtuous circles of benefit with people when they share. So I don't think that's a huge thing for me, reviewing feedback.
Wow, it's yeah, really
You know,
inspiring.
yeah. I mean, I had tears in my eyes when I got
Yeah,
that email, and in fact, I still get a bit,
I got
teary when
tears
I
in my
think
eyes when
about
you
it.
tell me that.
you know,
So I can't imagine you at this moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very
Wow.
emotional.
Yeah, it's great. So I love how you embody what you said. That's what I love also about you, and everything is aligned. That's why I also talk about, tip of the iceberg and introspection behind. Is that when you see something aligned, is not by randomly usually.
No, no,
There was
no.
a lot of work behind, and I like that. And yeah, it's also great that you use the past to feel better in the present.
Yes.
That's a conscious exercise that anyone can do.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
Yes.
that is very very practical, and be self aware, like you described, to be like, this is me today. This is what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
it's, you don't get caught in the future hopes.
No, exactly. And I think the important thing with visualization, well, one of the things that I've learned is it's really important to be quite specific about it. I was working with some colleagues once, and senior managers, and I was talking about using visualization, and one of the colleagues said, "Yeah, I used to do visualization when I was when I did swimming when I was younger." I said, "Oh yeah, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, my coach used to tell me, imagine what it was like winning the Olympics." And I said, did you ever win the Olympics?" And he said, "Well, no, I didn't." And I said, "Oh right, that's interesting," because I said, for me, with the pupils I used to teach at fencing, I always found that it was important to visualize something that they could really, really believe in and that
Yeah.
they really experienced. So I would say to them, can you imagine scoring 1 point? Yes, I can. Right. So in order to win a match, imagine yourself doing it 5 times in a row.
Hmm.
Rather than you're going to win the European Championships or you're going to win the final or you're going to win the Olympics, I said to them, I gave them visualization tasks that they'd already experienced, because I think if it's
It's more powerful.
visualization and
Yeah.
imagination are two slightly different things, and you can imagine something, but until you've experienced it, you can't totally visualize it, I find. And that's just my view. But I find that visualizing something that's actually happened that you
Yeah.
can then multiply makes more sense than trying to imagine something that hasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. I agree with that, and it resonates with me because it never really worked. This thing I've tried many times, the visualization of things I want or I'd like to happen, and it's so blurry.
Yes,
You have to involve imagination, and then your brain doesn't believe it anymore. It's like, "Yeah, come
exactly,
on,
because it
it's
knows it's not real. But
imagining stuff now."
yeah, if you can go back to something and recreate the sights, the sounds, the smells, even of
Mm,
that experience,
yeah.
the brain will say, because there's research that shows that the brain will react in exactly the same way to a real event
Yeah.
as to a visualized event, and I think you can get yourself back into that space quite quite well by using real events and then dialing it up a notch to kind of multiply it. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your what you say in your talk. So what is your view on change? I know. Wait, before you go, because I know we can talk about that for hours.
Yes,
So uh, your overview of change, I should say, and yeah, how do you? I know you talk, for example, about the hero's journey, but
yes.
not only, of course. So what is the?
I
Can you
think,
describe to people listening to us what it is and how it
yeah,
works?
sure. I mean, the talk works in three sections. I rattle on about myself and my own personal history for the first third. Then I talk about two kind of models of change that are widely known in the industry, and then I talk about my experience of change and what I've brought back from it, the principles that I've kind of brought into my life. But in terms of change as a practical process, I think there are the two models that I really relate to are the change curve, which takes you through the physical process of change, and then the hero's journey, which is something that Joseph Campbell modeled, which is almost like how do you get benefit, how do you get value out of change. So I
Hmm.
think if people can understand that the way they're feeling is actually, it's like when you're a teenager and you hear a song that you think it completely encapsulates your life, but you thought you were the only one who's ever lived that life. When you realise that other people are going through it.
I'm special.
Yes, exactly. But when you realise that other people are going through it, it kind of makes it. Sometimes it makes it more bearable, and if it doesn't get more bearable, you probably become a goth, and you stay that way. You could wear a lot of black and that sort of stuff. But
Hmm.
I think if you realise that change is a process, and most people tend to react to it in a similar way, it becomes easier. Not easier, but you can perhaps get through it a bit better. So I talk about the change curve where you have the initial shock, then you have denial, then you have depression, then you have experimentation, then you have sort of you then bring it into your life, and then you move on. So there's
Hmm.
that. Everybody goes through those emotions when subject to change, but not necessarily in the same order or the same speed. And then you've got Campbell's hero's journey, which is kind of not the physical process, but actually the way you get benefit out of it. And it's the hero quest. The hero, he or she, gets a calling. They're in their normal state. They go off and do something extraordinary. They learn a lot and they come back to life and apply it in their life. So those two models for me are quite fundamental in the way I've kind of put my philosophy together.
Hmm. So I have a question coming up when you're talking about this. Is that I believe people don't have the awareness or they don't have the opportunity to take a step back when they are in certain phases of the
Yes.
model,
Yes.
because they're caught with the emotion, right?
Yep.
So why would you what kind of tip can you give to people so they can take a little step back and say, oh, I'm in this period, I'm in denial, I'm in
Mm.
experimentation or whatever, and know what's coming next. Usually, of course, it's not a roadmap that always perfect, but what kind of advice can you give to people?
I think just kind of read about the change process. Look it up. There's lots of books about personal transformation that you can read, because once you realize that there are steps to it, it kind of, I have an expression, you're shining a light on the change monster that lives under the bed. When you're a kid and you're in bed and you hear a noise under the bed and you think, well, it's the change monster, it's a horrible monster, and then you look under the bed and it's not, there's nothing there. The other metaphor I use is the film Jaws. For 2/3 of the
Yeah.
film, you don't see the shark, and it's absolutely
So true.
terrifying.
Yeah, yeah,
And then you see the shark and you think, oh, it's a big rubber shark.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you can train yourself or catch yourself when you're reacting, in the sense of, right, you're in the moment, you're suddenly feeling depression or denial or shock or anger, it's like, catch it, stop it, and think, what am I hearing here? What am I feeling here? What am I actually reacting to? I mean, I had an example this week. I had a letter from a hospital, Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. I'm actually going to have brain surgery in 2 months' time to help with my Parkinson's. And
Okay.
I've been kind of waiting for it for the last year or so, because with the COVID things, there's been, operations haven't been available. So, and I wasn't expecting it to happen this year. So yesterday I went from not happening this year to happening in less than 2 months' time. And
Wow.
that kind of gives you a bit of an adrenaline rush. And then I thought, right, so what am I suddenly nervous about? I
Hmm.
know what the hospital visit entails. I'm nervous about getting to the hospital. Right, okay, well, that's not a big deal. My wife will help me with that. It might be difficult, but we'll come up with a plan. I'm a bit frightened of needles. Well, those needles are going to go in your arm to actually help you. They're not going in your arm to hurt you. They're helping you get through the operation.
Hmm.
So if you catch yourself before the change monster grabs you, or before if you see the rubber shark, it's a lot less frightening than it can be. And I think just being in the moment and really, I suppose it's a Zen thing. It's really examining the moment for what it is. What are you really scared of?
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, you find what you're really scared of isn't really that scary at all when you think about it.
Yeah. So the trigger is I have some emotions. So wait, pause,
Yes,
right?
pause. Yeah,
Trigger is emotions, pause, and
yeah.
then be
And
like,
then
okay,
just
let's
look
take a
at it.
step back. Yeah.
Almost
Okay.
be with it. Put your arms around it and say, right, I see you're here for a reason. Because we always react to change with fear. We can't help it. Another part of my talk really is that the fear of change is triggered by the fight, flight, or freeze reaction in our brain,
Yeah.
which is one of the most primitive parts of the brain. We've had it since we were little reptiles. So it's a primal reaction. And if you can kind of go, stop, what's going
Hmm.
on here? You can sometimes, short circuit the whole process, which is,
That's a superpower. That's a superpower.
it kind of is, I suppose. But just be
Do,
aware of it.
do you meditate?
I do, yes, yes.
Because that helps a lot. No.
It does. Listening to the mind, it's amazing how much rubbish is going on all the time. Sometimes just being in the silence is quite important, I think.
Huh. So, what can people do in this period? For example, this period of COVID. For people listening to us in the future, we are in 2021, in
Yep.
end of April, and it seems like a never-ending situation. And a lot of people, some clients, comes to me and say people are depressed in our company. It's a
Yeah.
lot of it's a hard mental struggle we live.
Yes.
So what kind of advice you can give to people listening to us?
I think it's going to sound, in a sense, it's going to sound quite glib. But one of the things I've been doing in some of my talks and my training sessions and work I've been doing with business analysts is put the fun back into it. We've all been living in this kind of letterbox shaped Zoom screen for the
Hmm.
last 12 to 18 months. Our job has been confined to this laptop monitor, or your TV monitor, or your mobile phone monitor screen sometimes in some cases. and it gets very, very samey. And try and put the fun back into it. Try and break. Well, one of the martial arts terms that you'll probably be familiar with is cadence and rhythm. If you're in a martial arts situation and you're doing your moves to exactly the same rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and you're going to get very predictable, very easy to defend against and counterattack. So I used to teach my fencers to, might go quick and then go slow and then go quick again,
Yeah.
because
Just a quick story around that. I used to do a bit of boxing when I
yes,
was living in London, and it was a guy from I don't want to say stupid things. I think Bulgaria, and he was always he wasn't using a lot of fancy words. He was just saying "pam, boom, boom, pa, pam," and
Mm.
it was always, and I found it always great because he
yeah,
wasn't giving us a lot of but he was just saying, "You do this, and then you
yeah,
just whoop, whoop, pa,
he was
pam," and
describing it.
you just get it. You get the dynamic, you get the rhythm. Exactly. So sorry, I cut you in
No,
your.
that's a lovely story, and I think that's a sort of pretty visceral demonstration of how it can work, because it's easy for me to say you need to vary your timing. So when I talk about it on Zoom, I will say, it could be quite important to leave people some time to think about things, but then other times you might want to rush people along.
Yeah.
And that is the most basic level of doing it. But everything you do in your job has a rhythm. So if you're running, say, a big meeting and you've just done a lot of intensive brainstorming, it might be you just want to give them a chance to have a doodle for 10 minutes. The,
Yeah.
the Japanese have another concept called ma. The word ma means space. And if you ever look at a Japanese painting or a bit of calligraphy, you'll find that it's never right bang in the middle, because the
Oh,
philosophy is the space is just as important as the actual piece of art. And I
yeah,
think,
we found that a lot in many arts as well.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's the same in kind of what you do, particularly if you're running meetings or you're speaking.
Hmm.
Sometimes you just got to leave a little bit of silence. Well read there, well read. Because it makes a difference and it allows people time to think. And in this Zoom world and the Microsoft Teams world, or whatever software you've been using world, it's constantly push, 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 push information, keep talking. We can't be quiet because we're online. We've got to show we're still alive and we're still working. Well, that's rubbish. You've got to give people time.
Yeah, yeah, and a client recently told me. I said, "Oh, so what are your main challenges?" And she nailed it. She said, um, "We don't have enough moments of breathing moments." And I was like, "Exactly." Between you go from one Zoom to the other, and then, "Oh no, I need to go groceries before it's lockdown and curfew and whatever." And it's you just go one after the other. You don't have. Sometimes I go on my balcony and I just take a coffee. I'm
You
like,
have to. You have to. And I think,
okay.
one thing that because of the immediacy of the crisis when the whole thing kicked off and lockdown came in and companies had to adapt or die, that kind of stuff. Everybody thought it was just working from home. And, in contracts over here in the UK in my company, we had working from home as an option, and you had the kit supplied to you and you perhaps do it 2 or 3 days a week and then come into the office. So that kind of just carried on and everyone thought they were working from home. I think people have been working at home, and that's a completely different thing for me. That means your home is your office. That
Yeah.
means everybody in your house is your colleague, and they can hear what you're doing, which in itself can have sensitivity issues if you're having a conversation about a private contract or whatever. So the world is not, it's not working from home, and employees and rather employers, I think, who've assumed that it's the same thing for their employees are wrong. It's not. You've allowed the office into your most sacrosanct space, your personal home. And
Mm.
we need to realize that there have to be boundaries, because I'm hearing of people working all through the night. And if that suits them, perhaps that's okay. But people are doing, I mean, I talk to my old colleagues and they're doing Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call. And you have to have that break, you have to have that moment of introspection to kind of just be able to kind of appreciate the what you've got, to bring yourself back, because without that I think people are just getting burnt out. That's the worry I have, is that people are just getting completely exhausted, because you have to
Yeah.
concentrate so much on a little laptop's window. you know, there's a I'm gonna sound like I'm repeating myself now. There's an old samurai saying about viewing the distant mountain. And the philosophy of that was when you're fighting an opponent, you don't look at them, because everything on their body, you'll know this as a martial artist. I could feint with my head, I could feint with my feet, I could draw you into something you thought I was going to do, which I was going to do differently with my body. So you don't look at what your opponent is doing, you look at the distant mountain and you get the view of it, the kind of overall view of what they're doing. But I translate that sometimes as just look out the window, you know.
Yeah.
Change your focus, like you said, go out on your balcony, look out of your window, because you're constantly looking at your screen these days, and that's no way to be enjoying your life as far as I'm concerned. Sorry, I got a bit ranty there.
No worries, no worries. But you know what? I was thinking because we wanted to talk about creativity today as well, and I think I'm trying to keep those podcasts shorter than I used to do. And you should come back again on the podcast. I'm sure you have nothing against that.
No, I'd be happy to.
And I'd love to talk, about creativity and the and change again and all those things, because I think it's we can go way further than that. Right now, we gave a glimpse into what you say, and as you know, I can talk with you for a long time. But for the next time, for people listening to us, I just decided that right now I just inviting David again,
Hey,
because there is there is so much more to say about this. And so come back, guys, for the next episode. Right now I wanted to introduce you to this amazing guest.
bless you.
Before we wrap up, I want you please to give people listening to us 2-3 tips, mainly for people who are working in a company and who are hesitating to become entrepreneurs. What would you tell them?
I think if you believe in an idea and you think it's going to make a difference to people, do it. You know, it's a glib thing to say, but sometimes you have got to jump. And I think when you're at the point when you will come, there will come a point where you know you're ready, and you need to listen to that and be prepared to go for it, because I think everybody who's listening to this and everybody who I talk to in presentations, we have all got something about us that is extraordinary. And if you can find that, and if you can access that, what you want to do with it will be extraordinary as well. So that would be my thing to say to people: find what's
Wow,
extraordinary about you and share it, because it'll be a fantastic story.
I love that. Where can we find you, David?
Well,
Give
I'm
us a couple
currently
of
in my
links.
conservatory, so if you pop through the lounge from the kitchen, you'll find me in there. No, I'm on LinkedIn, and from LinkedIn you can get access to all my blogs, etc., etc. So I have a couple of blogs as well, and my company website is tudoconsulting.com, if I recall correctly, but I might be wrong.
We will put all the links in the description.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be good.
Well, David, that's great. I'm sorry to end up like that. I'm eager to continue, but I made a promise to myself and my team that we would keep them
We
short.
need
And
space. Let's see, we need space.
I told you 30, 45 minutes, and we're already at like 55. So, um, anyway, I really believe we need a second episode or more, because there is so much to talk about. I want to have you take on creativity, which is a different take from
Yeah,
mine, obviously, and very interesting take. And in the meanwhile, for people listening to us, I remind you that you can find the Creativity Podcast on YouTube, on SoundCloud, Apple and Google Podcasts, and Spotify. So share this episode with friends and colleagues if you liked it. And David, thank you again for your time. It was great.
you're most welcome. It's been a pleasure, mate.
And I wish you to have a great day.
Same to you and everyone listening.